Okay, this is chapter 7. Chapter 7 is all about adding and subtracting fractions. Now, we looked at that in chapter 6 a bit, but in this chapter, we're going to be looking at fractions that don't just have common denominators. Okay, so we'll be looking at fractions that have denominators that are not the same. So then we have to change them so that they do have common denominators. When fractions have common denominators, then we can add them together. Easier anyways. Okay, so by definition, a common denominator is when two fractions have the same denominator. And you should know at this point what a denominator is. Right here, we've got a 4 and an 8. Those are our denominators. But right now, in this example, we can't add them together because the 4 and the 8, the denominators are not the same. We have to find a common denominator. Okay. Now, what we're going to look at initially, just want to change my color here. What we're going to look at initially is very simply at these fractions that do not have common denominators. Now, what you'll do right off the bat, and this is our first look at finding common denominators, is that you'll look at your small number and you'll see if you can make it into your big number. Okay. And in this case, what can we do with 4 to make it into 8? Well, we can multiply it by 2. Some of you may have said, well, you can add 4 to make it 8. But we're not going to do any adding or subtracting. When you're working with fractions, you will typically, maybe always, be multiplying or dividing. And I will focus pretty much exclusively on just multiplying. Okay. So in this example, we can multiply 4 by 2 to get 8. So we look here. We multiply our 4 by 2. Now, when you're changing fractions, if you ever alter your denominator, change your denominator, you also have to change your numerator. So in this case, we're going to go 4 times 2 to make 8. We're also going to go 1 times 2 to make 2. That keeps your fraction equivalent. So 2/8 is the same fraction as 1/4 or 1/4, just different numbers. Okay. Now we have 8 as a denominator. So now you can take your 2/8 and your 3/8 and you can add them together or do whatever you need to do. Okay. So I want you to look here. Now, right now I want you to pause the video and I want you to work on these 4 and see how you do. And then I'm going to turn the video back on and I'll solve them with you. Okay. All right. So hopefully you've had a chance to take a peek at those and to give them a try. So I look at my 1/3 and my 2/6 and I go, can I make my 3 into a 6? And yes, I can. What can I do with it? Well, I can take my 1/3 and I can multiply it by 2. And that will go, so 1 times 2 is 2. 3 times 2 is 6. So now I have 2/6. Okay. And if we were adding here, we could add 2/6 and 2/6, right? This is just a coincidence that these two numbers are the same. That's not always the case. Okay, so let's look at this next one. So we have 5 2/5 and 6 15ths. You ask yourself, can I change the 5 into a 15? So what can you do? That's right, you can multiply it by 3. So we take our 2/5, we multiply by 3. 2 times 3 is 6. Oh, I did it again. And 3 times 5 is 15. Maybe all these are the same. Nope, they're not. Okay, so again, just coincidence. So now I have two fractions that have the same denominator. It just so happens that they have the same numerator as well. That's just by chance. Okay, next one, 4/12 and 3/6. What can we do here? Can we make this 6 into a 12? You bet. We can take our 3/6 and multiply it by 2. 3 times 2 is 6, and 6 times 2 is 12. Now we have 4/12 and 6/12. Now we can add those together, or whatever we happen to be doing. One more time. We've got our 8 and our 24. Can you make 8 into 24? Darn tootin'. We can take our 5/8 and we can multiply it by 3. And that will give you, well, 5 times 3 is 15. 3 times 8 is 24. Now we have 15 24ths and 10 24ths. And we can add, subtract, multiply, or whatever we're doing with them, right? Okay, so that's a little bit of an example of how you make common denominators. Now in this example, we've just been looking at two numbers. It doesn't really matter how much you have, how many you're dealing with. You look at this one here, ordering fractions. So now we'll look at, we've got 4 fractions. You're like, holy smokes, what am I going to do here? Same thing, okay? Here is our biggest number. So we want to go, can we make these numbers, these other numbers, 8, 4, and 12, can we make them into 24? And it just so happens that you can, okay? So it says here, the first step is to find a common denominator. And usually you look to the biggest number. I'm actually not going to go into that right now. We are in the next section. But anyways, so 24 is our common denominator. We can make everything into 24. So I've got that down here for you. So if we took 5/8, we'd have to multiply that by 3. And 5 times 3 is 15. 8 times 3 is 24. Now we have a fraction. Remember, these two are equivalent, right? So now we have a fraction that has a denominator that's 24. Okay, same down here. We multiply 1/4 by 6. 1 times 6 is 6. 4 times 6 is 24. Now we have that fraction with a denominator of 24. Okay. This one we didn't have to do anything because it already had a denominator of 24. Okay, and this one here, we are multiplying by 2. So 6 times 2 is 12. 12 times 2 is 24. So now we have these 4 fractions. Hey, now which one's biggest? Actually, what were we ordering them? I can't remember. Were we ordering them? Oh, so smallest to largest will go. So now you can look at these and you can decide which one is bigger than the other. Which one is the, we'll go smallest. What is the smallest fraction? 6 out of 24, that's right. What is our next smallest or next biggest one? Okay, it's 10 24, so that's second. What is our next biggest one? 12 24s, and the last one is 15 24s. That's our biggest fraction there. Okay, so here's a couple of examples. Oh, so there I've got least to greatest. Just did it right there. So here's some practice. So 8, 6, and 12. These are tricky because we have to find a denominator. You know what? I'm not going to do this practice with you because this gets into our next section, which is, again, finding common denominators, but they're a little bit trickier than what I've gone over so far. So just to recap, common denominator is when 2 fractions have the same denominator. If you have 2 fractions, right? If you have 2 fractions and they don't have the same denominator, you have to do something to them to change them. And in these examples, all we're doing is making that smaller fraction into the bigger one and seeing what we can do with that. All of these that we've looked at so far, you can do that. You can change the smaller denominator into the bigger one. That's not always going to be the case. So in the next video that we do, we'll look at, okay, well, how do you find one? If you can't make that smaller number into the bigger one, how do you find a common denominator?